She paid for her seat, but they told her to move. They said, "People like you don't sit up here." Phones were recording, but no one stepped in. Minutes later, the whole cabin found out exactly who she was. The outburst. The luxury first-class cabin gleamed under the soft glow of overhead lights, polished surfaces reflecting the early afternoon sun streaming through the oval windows. The hush of boarding was shattered as a sharp voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Claire, the white female flight attendant, mid-40s, blonde hair in a strict bun, crisp navy blue uniform with gold accents, stood rigid in the aisle, one hand on her hip and the other pointing sharply toward the rear of the plane. Her face twisted with irritation, her voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Claire, snapping. "You don't belong here. First class is for paying passengers only. Get up and move to coach, now." The sudden outburst drew every eye in the cabin. Leather seats creaked as passengers turned their heads. Phones were quietly lifted, their red recording lights blinking faintly as the confrontation became a spectacle. Maya Johnson, the young black woman, mid-20s, smooth dark skin, natural curls tied back neatly, wearing a tailored cream coat over a soft blue dress, sat calmly in her wide leather seat. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Claire at first, she simply adjusted her coat sleeve, her expression composed, almost detached, before finally lifting her gaze. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Almost soft. "Maya, evenly. This is my seat. You may want to double-check your manifest before you embarrass yourself further." Claire's face flushed a deeper red, not from embarrassment, but from indignation. Her voice rose another notch, deliberately theatrical now, so everyone could hear. Claire, snapping. "Don't test me. If you don't move this second, I'll call security and have you removed from this flight altogether." The entire cabin froze, the tension thick as sunlight poured across the polished surfaces, making every movement, every breath, feel heavier. Whispers began to ripple between the other passengers, their voices low but carrying in the tense quiet. One middle-aged man in a suit, seated diagonally across the aisle, muttered under his breath as he tapped his phone screen to start recording. "She's calm, way too calm. This isn't going to end how Claire thinks it will." The calm response. The whispers spread through the cabin like a wave, every passenger leaning just slightly to catch a better view of the unfolding confrontation. Leather seats creaked softly as heads turned. Some muttered in support of Claire, while others frowned at her tone. Claire stood tall in the aisle, one hand still on her hip, the other clutching the manifest tablet she hadn't even looked at yet. Her jaw was tight, her voice steady but loud. "Claire, firmly. This is first class. I don't care what you think your ticket says, you don't sit here." Maya, sitting perfectly still in her seat, tilted her head slightly toward Claire. Her eyes were calm, unshaken, her voice soft but clear. "Maya, evenly. I already told you. This is my seat. You're welcome to verify that before you make yourself look foolish in front of your entire cabin." A few passengers murmured louder now, their tones mixed. "She sounds sure of herself. Or she's bluffing. Why else would Claire be so certain?" Across the aisle, a middle-aged businessman in a tailored gray suit, salt and pepper hair, polished cufflinks, lowered his phone for a moment, leaning toward the woman beside him. Businessman, whispering. "Watch her. She's too calm. She's not bluffing." Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, Grace, the younger attendant, early 20s, brunette ponytail, softer demeanor, glanced nervously between Claire and Maya. Her hand hovered near the passenger manifest clipped beside the galley, her lips parting as if to speak, but Claire's glare shot back at her like a warning. Claire, snapping at Grace. "Stay out of it. Handle the drinks. I'll deal with this." Grace's hand froze midair. She stepped back silently, her eyes lingering on Maya for just a second, her brow furrowed. The tension thickened, the hum of the plane's air vents suddenly deafening in the silence as all eyes shifted back to Claire and Maya. Tension spreads. The first-class cabin buzzed softly with hushed voices, the tension now palpable. Passengers shifted in their wide leather seats, some leaning toward each other, others lifting their phones a little higher to catch every second of the standoff. Near the windows, a socialite in her 30s, platinum blonde curls, designer sunglasses perched on her head, wearing a pastel silk scarf, whispered loudly enough for the row behind her to hear. Socialite, muttering. She probably just snuck up here during boarding. Happens all the time. Her companion, a man in a tailored navy suit, smirked and nodded, keeping his phone low as he typed a message. This'll be all over Instagram in 5 minutes. But further down the aisle, the middle-aged businessman frowned, his voice low but firm as he spoke to the passenger beside him. Businessman, quietly. She hasn't raised her voice once. Look at her posture, she knows something Claire doesn't. Claire, still standing over Maya with her tablet clutched to her side, noticed the growing whispers but pressed on, her tone deliberately louder now, ensuring every passenger could hear. Claire, projecting. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay, but we have a seating issue. This passenger refuses to move to her proper seat. Security may be called if necessary. Gasps and murmurs rippled instantly through the cabin. The socialite smirked wider, whispering. See? She's not supposed to be here. But the businessman shook his head, muttering to no one in particular. She's not panicking. Watch, this isn't over. Maya, still perfectly poised in her seat, let the whispers swirl without reacting. She calmly reached for her phone on the armrest, typed a brief message, and set it back down face up. Her expression didn't change, her gaze steady on Claire as if none of the stares, cameras, or accusations mattered. The tension in the air deepened, every passenger now hanging on what would happen next. The public threat. Claire's heels clicked sharply on the carpet as she planted herself firmly in the aisle, her posture stiff and commanding. Her voice rose, deliberate and theatrical, echoing through the quiet first-class cabin so no one could miss a word. Claire, loudly. This is your final warning. Either you move to coach right now, or I will personally call security to have you removed from this flight. The words hung in the air like a threatened storm, every passenger in the cabin pausing whatever they were doing. Even the sound of the soft boarding music felt distant now. Phones went up higher. A man in his late 40s near the bulkhead whispered into his camera. She's doing this in front of everyone, this is going viral the moment we take off. The socialite across the aisle smirked, leaning toward her friend and whispering just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Finally, someone putting her in her place. But the businessman who had been watching intently muttered under his breath, his tone calm but certain. Claire's about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Maya, still sitting with perfect composure, finally lifted her gaze from her phone to meet Claire's eyes. Her voice was soft, so soft, the passengers had to lean in slightly to catch it. Maya, evenly. If you truly believe you're right, Claire, then call them. Let's see how fast this flight ends for you, not me. A hush fell over the cabin, the tension now thick as steel wire. Even Grace, standing nervously by the galley, looked frozen in place, her hand gripping the edge of the manifest clip as her eyes darted between the two women. Claire's jaw tightened, her knuckles whitening around the tablet. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation flashed in her eyes, though she quickly buried it beneath another glare. The first-class divide. The cabin was no longer whispering, now, quiet murmurs rolled through first class like a low tide. Passengers weren't just observing, they were choosing sides. The socialite across the aisle leaned back in her plush leather seat, crossing her legs with a smug smile. She whispered to her friend, her voice deliberately loud enough for Maya to hear. Socialite, mocking. Honestly, she's just trying to get a free upgrade. People like her always push boundaries. A soft chuckle came from a passenger 2 rows behind, a man in a designer hoodie with wireless earbuds dangling around his neck. Can't blame her for trying, but rules are rules, he muttered, pulling out his phone to start recording as well. But not everyone agreed. Across the aisle, the businessman, still watching carefully, finally spoke a little louder, his voice calm but firm. Businessman. Or maybe, someone should check the manifest before throwing accusations around. because the only person disturbing this cabin right now isn't her. A couple of heads turned toward him, the murmurs growing louder as passengers traded uneasy looks. Near the galley, Grace shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. Her hand brushed against the manifest again, her lips parting as if to speak, but Claire's sharp glance cut her silent instantly. Claire, snapping quietly at Grace. Not a word. The tension swelled even more as Maya, still seated, adjusted her cream blazer sleeve and set her phone face down on the armrest. Her calm expression hadn't changed once, but now her eyes locked on Claire's, unblinking, as though waiting for her to take one step too far. Passengers leaned in closer, their phones held a little higher. Everyone could feel it, the shift was coming. Maya's silent power. The soft hum of the cabin seemed to fade as all eyes fixed on the silent standoff. Claire's jaw tightened as she stood rigid in the aisle, the weight of the passenger's stare starting to press against her confidence. Maya, still seated in her plush first-class chair, adjusted her posture slightly, shoulders back, chin level. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look at the passengers. Her calm gaze was fixed solely on Claire, as though the entire cabin didn't exist. Slowly, she reached for her phone on the armrest. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as she typed a quick message. Then she placed the phone back down, face up, the screen glowing faintly beside her. The businessman across the aisle noticed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. He whispered to the passenger beside him. Businessman, low, knowing. She's not waiting for Claire to make a move, she's already set something in motion. Claire's eyes darted to the glowing phone, then back to Maya. Her voice was steady, but a thread of unease had crept in beneath the edge. Claire, snapping. Messaging someone won't change the fact that you're in the wrong seat. Security will be here in 2 minutes. Maya's response was soft, her tone almost soothing, yet it carried a weight that made Claire stiffen. Maya, evenly. 2 minutes. That's all it will take for this to turn around. Not for me, for you. The words lingered like a slow-burning fuse, pulling murmurs from the surrounding passengers. Even Grace, still near the galley, glanced toward Maya with a flicker of something new, hope. The tension shifted subtly, as if the air itself had thickened around Claire, her once commanding presence now beginning to fray. The junior crew's hesitation. The first-class cabin felt heavier now, the murmurs growing louder as phones hovered in the air, quietly recording every moment. The balance of power was shifting, even the passengers who had sided with Claire earlier were starting to fall silent, sensing something was coming. Near the galley, Grace, the younger flight attendant, early 20s, brunette ponytail, softer features, navy uniform slightly looser fitting than Claire's crisp ensemble, shifted nervously. Her hand hovered over the passenger manifest clipped beside the service station, her brows knitting as her eyes darted between Claire and Maya. Finally, she took a small step forward, speaking just above a whisper. Grace, tentatively. Claire, maybe we should just double-check the list? It could save us. Before she could finish, Claire's sharp heels clicked as she spun toward her, her voice like ice. Claire, snapping. Grace, stay in your lane. I don't need a trainee second-guessing me in front of a cabin full of premium passengers. The words were louder than Claire intended, drawing glances from nearby passengers. One man 2 rows back muttered under his breath, just loud enough to be caught on another phone's microphone. She's losing it, snapping at her own crew now. Grace's lips pressed into a tight line as she stepped back, reluctantly obeying, though her eyes lingered on Maya. Her grip on the manifest tightened, her knuckles whitening. She knew something was wrong, but Claire's glare kept her frozen. Meanwhile, Maya hadn't moved. Her calm expression remained unchanged, her gaze still locked on Claire. She spoke softly, almost conversationally. Maya, evenly. When someone warns you twice, and you still don't listen, that's when consequences arrive. Her voice, though gentle, rippled through the cabin, pulling a hush over the whispers once again. Even Claire blinked, her confidence faltering for a fleeting second before she straightened her shoulders, forcing a smirk. The Whisper Network. The cabin murmurs deepened, No longer just background noise, now they had a current of tension. Passengers leaned toward each other in low voices, careful but not careful enough to hide the growing shift in the atmosphere. A teenager with earbuds draped around his neck, seated 2 rows back, whispered to the woman beside him while his phone discreetly recorded. Teenager, low. She's not scared at all. Look at her. She hasn't moved, hasn't raised her voice. She's waiting for something. Near the aisle, the middle-aged businessman adjusted his cufflinks and murmured with a faint smirk to a man across from him. Businessman, quietly. She's not bluffing. This is about to flip, and everyone here is going to wish they kept their mouths shut. The socialite up front, who had been smirking confidently moments ago, glanced around uneasily as the whispers began to turn. She lowered her sunglasses and muttered to her companion, her voice quieter now. Socialite, hesitant. Why hasn't she moved yet? Why does she look so calm? At the galley, Grace pretended to rearrange service trays, but her eyes never left Maya. Her hand rested on the passenger manifest again, her thumb tracing the clip nervously as though weighing whether to finally speak up. Claire, catching the glances, straightened her spine, her tone turning colder and louder, trying to reclaim control. Claire, projecting. For anyone wondering, this passenger doesn't have proper credentials for first class. We can't allow freeloaders disrupting premium seating. The businessman snorted softly, muttering just loud enough for his voice to carry. She just said freeloaders, in a cabin full of cameras. This is career suicide. Maya, still poised, didn't react to Claire's words or the whispers swirling around her. Instead, she gently adjusted her phone again, not looking at it, just letting the faint glow of the screen remain visible. Her steady gaze stayed on Claire, as if daring her to take one more step. Claire doubles down. Claire's patience cracked, her lips pressing into a thin line as the low murmurs from passengers grew louder. Her posture stiffened, and she stepped closer to Maya, heels clicking sharply against the carpet, as though each step was meant to reassert control. Her voice rose again, sharp and clear, slicing through the hushed whispers. Claire, loudly. Enough of this. This is the last time I'll ask. Get up and move to coach, or I'll personally see to it you're removed from this flight and banned from flying with this airline again. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones were now fully raised, capturing every word, some passengers glancing at each other as the weight of Claire's threat settled in. The socialite shifted in her seat, whispering nervously to her friend. She's going too far, this doesn't feel right anymore. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cutting as he spoke just loud enough to be overheard. Businessman. She's about to bury herself. Every second she keeps talking is another nail in her own career. Maya, still seated with perfect composure, didn't flinch. She adjusted the cuff of her cream coat, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the tense cabin. Maya, evenly. Threats don't change the truth, Claire. And the truth is, you're seconds away from making this your last flight in uniform. Claire's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. She leaned slightly closer, her voice low but sharp. Claire, hissing. Oh, I think you'll find out who's in charge here very soon. But as she spoke, the murmurs from the cabin swelled, and even Grace by the galley now stared openly, her grip on the manifest clip tightening, as though she knew the power dynamic had just shifted, even if Claire didn't. Maya's first warning. The cabin felt still, the tension pressing down like a heavy blanket. Passengers barely moved in their seats, their phones raised, the hum of the engines the only sound between words. Maya slowly turned her head toward Claire, her calm gaze unblinking. Her voice, though soft, carried through the entire first-class cabin, a sharp contrast to Claire's escalating volume. Maya, evenly. You've been told twice. And you're ignoring what's right in front of you. Claire, in a matter of minutes, this won't be my problem anymore. It'll be yours. The words hit like a quiet thunderclap. No shouting, no raised tone, yet every passenger shifted slightly, sensing the weight behind them. The socialite lowered her phone a little, whispering nervously to her companion. Why does she sound so certain? What's about to happen? Across the aisle, the businessman gave a faint smirk, leaning back in his seat as if settling in for what he already knew was coming. He murmured to himself, just loud enough for the nearby microphones to catch. Businessman, low. Now she's warning her. This is the turning point. Claire, however, forced a cold smile, mistaking Maya's calm for submission. She straightened her back, raising her chin as her voice sharpened. Claire, mocking. What, are you going to call someone? Make a complaint? You're wasting your breath. On this plane, I make the rules. A few passengers exchanged uneasy looks, the murmurs growing louder, some whispering things like, she's really digging her grave now. Maya, unbothered, simply tilted her head and murmured. Maya, softly. Then by all means, keep talking. The clock is running. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was anticipation, the entire cabin now waiting for the inevitable shift they could all feel coming. Passengers pick sides. The murmurs turned into open whispers, weaving through the first-class cabin as passengers stopped hiding their reactions. Phones stayed raised, recording every second, but now voices were choosing sides. A man in a designer hoodie, leaning back in his seat with his phone angled discreetly, muttered to his seatmate. Honestly, Claire's right. Rules are rules. She probably is trying to sneak an upgrade. But the businessman across the aisle turned toward him, his expression calm but firm. Or maybe Claire's ego is about to cost her job. You can feel it, can't you? She's not panicking because she knows something we don't. The socialite who had been smirking earlier now glanced uneasily between Maya and Claire. She whispered to her companion, her confidence faltering. Why hasn't security come yet? And why isn't she even arguing back? Across the cabin, a mother traveling with her teenage daughter leaned forward, whispering. Sweetheart, watch closely. This is what it looks like when someone has real power, they don't need to shout. At the galley, Grace kept glancing down at the manifest, her thumb nervously rubbing along the clip. She whispered under her breath, barely audible. She is on the list. I saw it. Why won't Claire just look? But Claire didn't hear or didn't care. Her arms crossed tightly over her navy blazer, her voice rising again as she addressed not just Maya, but the entire cabin. Claire, projecting. Ladies and gentlemen, this passenger refuses to cooperate. I will not let someone disrupt first class for everyone else here. Security will handle this shortly. A few passengers nodded reluctantly, but most exchanged uneasy glances. The businessman's faint smirk returned as he muttered quietly, almost as if speaking for the cameras. She's not going to like who shows up. Maya, her hands resting loosely on her lap, remained silent. But her gaze never left Claire, a calm, steady look that made Claire's confident posture falter for just a split second. Grace steps closer. The tension thickened as Claire stood stiff in the aisle, her arms crossed like a wall, her voice still echoing faintly in the hush that followed. But not everyone stayed silent. At the galley, Grace, the younger flight attendant, early 20s, brunette ponytail, softer features, uniform slightly loose compared to Claire's, couldn't stand still anymore. Her eyes darted from Maya to the manifest clipped by the service station, her jaw tightening. Slowly, she reached out, fingers curling around the edge of the manifest. Her voice, quiet but audible, cut through the low hum of whispers. Grace, tentatively. Claire, maybe we should double-check the list. It'll take 2 seconds, and... Claire's head snapped around, the sharp click of her heels as she pivoted ringing out in the tense cabin. Her voice was ice, and loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Claire, snapping. Grace, no. Do your job. I said I know who belongs here, and it's not her. The businessman across the aisle arched a brow, muttering just loud enough for nearby cameras to pick up. Did she really just say that out loud? In a cabin full of people filming? Grace's fingers froze on the manifest. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she withdrew her hand, but her eyes lingered on Maya, a flicker of recognition and unease sparking behind them. Maya, still silent, slowly shifted her gaze from Claire to Grace, a subtle glance that said everything without a word. Then, with perfect calm, she spoke, not to Grace, but to Claire. Maya, softly. Every warning has an ending. And yours is almost here. The words, though spoken gently, hung in the air like a blade, making even the murmurs pause for a moment. A ripple of apprehension passed through the passengers. Even Claire's confident stance stiffened, just for a second, before she masked it with a dismissive scoff. The silent countdown. The cabin felt heavy, every breath and shuffle of fabric amplified as the tension built. Even the faint hum of the engine seemed to fade under the weight of what was coming. Maya, still seated with perfect composure, reached for her phone again. Her movements were slow, deliberate, not rushed, not defensive. She tapped the screen a few times, her expression unchanged, then placed the phone face up on the armrest, its faint glow visible to anyone nearby. The businessman across the aisle noticed immediately. His lips curved into the faintest smirk as he murmured to the passenger next to him, his tone almost amused. Businessman, low. There it is. She's not waiting for security, she's calling in something much bigger. A teenager a few rows back, still recording with his phone, whispered to his friend. She's way too calm. It's like she knows something's about to happen. The socialite, who had been smug earlier, now shifted uncomfortably in her seat, lowering her sunglasses. She murmured to her companion. Why does this feel different? What is she doing with that phone? Claire noticed, too, her eyes flicked to the glowing screen, a faint flicker of unease crossing her face. But she quickly hid it behind another glare, raising her chin and projecting her voice for the whole cabin. Claire, snapping. Text whoever you want. It won't change the fact that you're leaving this seat in 30 seconds. Maya, her calm eyes locking on Claire's, spoke softly, but her words cut through the murmurs like a knife. Maya, evenly. 30 seconds? No, Claire. It'll take far less than that for you to realize your mistake. The entire cabin froze, the air feeling tight, as passengers instinctively leaned forward, sensing that something, or someone, was about to arrive. Claire's authority wavers. Claire stood in the aisle, shoulders squared, but there was a flicker in her stance now, a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Her voice rose again, louder and sharper, not just to address Maya but to mask the unease creeping in. Claire, projecting. Everyone, let's be clear, rules are rules. First class is for paying passengers, not anyone who sneaks their way in. We're not tolerating freeloaders today. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The word freeloaders landed like a slap, especially with half a dozen phones recording every syllable. A passenger 2 rows back muttered audibly for the cameras. She's done. That word alone just ended her career. The socialite, who had been smirking earlier, now tugged her scarf nervously, whispering to her companion. She keeps saying things she shouldn't. Why isn't anyone stopping her? At the galley, Grace took a tentative step forward again, manifest still in hand, her brow furrowed. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. Grace, softly. Claire, please. Just check the list. She's... Claire spun around, her voice sharp as a whip. Claire, snapping. Grace! I said stay out of this. Do not question me in front of passengers. The businessman across the aisle leaned back slightly, a faint chuckle escaping him. He murmured to no one in particular, his tone dripping with certainty. Businessman, low. Every word she says is another nail in her own coffin. Watch, it's almost over. Maya, still perfectly calm, leaned back slightly in her seat, her eyes on Claire. Her voice was soft, measured, but carried enough to hush the murmurs for a moment. Maya, evenly. You've chosen pride over reason, Claire. In less than a minute, you'll see how costly that choice was. For the first time, Claire's confident posture wavered. Her fingers tightened around her tablet, her eyes darting, just briefly, toward the front of the plane, as if expecting something. Maya's second warning. The cabin went still, the murmurs dying down as if everyone collectively realized something was about to happen. Even the faint engine hum felt louder in the sudden hush. Maya sat poised, her posture perfect, hands resting lightly on her lap. She tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze never leaving Claire, and spoke in a voice so even and deliberate that it drew every ear closer. "Maya, softly. I'll give you one last chance, Claire. In less than 60 seconds, this won't be about a seat. It'll be about your career, and everything you just said in front of these cameras." The words didn't rise in volume, but they cut through the air like a blade. Passengers shifted, leaning closer, phones angled higher, as if knowing the climax was approaching. The socialite, once smug, now whispered nervously to her companion. "She's not bluffing. You can hear it in her voice." Across the aisle, the businessman gave a low, knowing hum, murmuring to himself. "That's the third warning. Claire's finished." Claire, her jaw tight, forced a scoff, trying to keep her voice steady even as her confidence began to fray. Claire, mocking. "Oh, really? And what exactly is going to happen in 60 seconds? Are you going to call your lawyer? Your boyfriend? Go ahead. I'm not scared of idle threats." Maya, unfazed, leaned back slightly in her seat. Her voice dropped just a little, her calmness more unsettling than any anger could be. "Maya, evenly. Not a threat, Claire. A promise." The entire cabin froze, the tension thick enough to feel in the air. Even Grace, holding the manifest at her side, instinctively took a step back, her eyes darting toward the cockpit, sensing something was coming, even if Claire didn't. The cabin holds its breath. The first-class cabin felt like it had been wrapped in glass, silent, tense, and ready to shatter at any second. Even the soft ding of a seatbelt sign felt deafening as passengers sat frozen, eyes darting between Maya and Claire. The socialite, who had been recording the whole time, slowly lowered her phone, whispering to her companion. "Why do I feel like she's not the one in trouble anymore?" A teenager further back, still holding his phone steady, whispered to his friend. "She said 60 seconds. I think something's about to happen, and we're all gonna see it." The businessman leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his tone calm but certain as he murmured just loud enough for nearby passengers and cameras to hear. Businessman, low. "If you were smart, Claire, you'd stop talking now. But I know you won't." Claire, standing stiff in the aisle, tightened her grip on the tablet. Her eyes flicked to the phones, to the passengers, and back to Maya, a flash of something like doubt flickering before she masked it with a forced smirk. Claire, projecting. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry, we'll have this sorted in a moment. Security will make sure everyone is where they're supposed to be." Her voice wavered just slightly on the last sentence, enough for a couple of passengers to exchange knowing glances. Maya, still calm, adjusted her blazer sleeve and rested her hand lightly on the glowing phone beside her. Her voice was soft, steady, but each word landed like a quiet drumbeat. "Maya, evenly. You're right, Claire. In a moment, everyone will be exactly where they're supposed to be." The cabin seemed to hold its breath, every pair of eyes locked forward, waiting for whatever was about to come through that cockpit door. Footsteps from the front. The cabin stayed frozen in silence, every passenger's gaze fixed on the front of the plane. Even the soft rustle of clothing or the hum of the air vents felt unnaturally loud. Then, from beyond the cockpit door, came the sound everyone had been waiting for. Footsteps. Deliberate. Heavy. Measured. Each step echoing faintly along the carpeted aisle, pulling every set of eyes forward. The door opened slowly, revealing the head pilot, a tall, graying man in a pristine captain's uniform, cap tucked under his arm. His face was serious, lips pressed into a line as his eyes swept across the tense cabin. Claire, straightening immediately, felt relief wash over her face as she stepped toward him, voice brisk but strained. Claire, relieved. "Captain, thank you. We have a situation, a passenger refusing to move to her correct seat. She's holding up departure." The captain didn't respond. His gaze moved past Claire, landing on Maya, who still sat poised and silent in her seat, one hand resting lightly beside her glowing phone. His expression shifted, subtle but noticeable, to one of respect. Without looking at Claire, his voice was firm, deep, and carried through the quiet. "Captain! Miss Johnson, we're ready for you. Would you like to handle this now?" The words landed like a shockwave. Gasps and murmurs erupted instantly through the cabin. The socialite leaned forward in her seat, whispering to her companion, stunned. "Miss Johnson? Wait, is she important?" The teenager recording whispered under his breath. "Oh, this is about to blow up. She's not just a passenger." Claire's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the tablet as she turned sharply toward the captain. Claire, stammering. "Wait, what? Handle what? Who exactly is she?" The captain's eyes finally moved to Claire, his tone even but carrying a weight that made a few passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Captain. Someone you really should have treated with respect." The pilot's news. The first-class cabin erupted into murmurs, phones rising higher as everyone leaned in to catch what the captain would say next. Even the hum of the engines felt drowned out by the quiet, collective anticipation. The captain stepped fully into the aisle, his calm, steady presence commanding immediate attention. He glanced briefly at the glowing phones around him, then back to Maya, giving a slight nod of acknowledgement before turning his gaze to Claire. "Captain," firmly. "Miss Johnson is not just another passenger. She is a principal shareholder in this airline, and the primary investor for this aircraft's new first-class program." The words struck the cabin like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the rows. A man near the bulkhead muttered into his phone, barely believing it. "She owns part of the airline? Claire is finished." The socialite who had been smirking earlier now sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her scarf twisting nervously in her hands. She whispered to her friend. She wasn't bluffing, not for a second. The teenager recording whispered to his friend, eyes wide. "Oh, this video's going viral before we even land." Claire's face drained of color, her confident posture faltering as she stumbled over her words. Claire, stammering. I didn't. I mean, I wasn't aware." Maya, still seated with perfect poise, finally lifted her gaze to Claire, her voice soft but carrying effortlessly through the stunned cabin. "Maya, evenly. That's the problem, Claire. You weren't aware, because you didn't bother to treat me like everyone else. You assumed. And now, everyone gets to see it." Phone stayed fixed on the scene, capturing every word, every flicker of panic in Claire's expression as the weight of the moment crushed the authority she thought she had. The room freezes. For a moment, the cabin seemed to stop breathing. Passengers stared wide-eyed, phones raised, capturing the unfolding revelation from every angle. The earlier murmurs turned into a low wave of astonished whispers. The socialite, her earlier smugness gone, leaned toward her companion, her voice a hushed gasp. "She's the owner? The shareholder? We were mocking her." A man in his 40s seated near the front whispered to the passenger beside him. "Claire's done. Every second of this is being streamed right now. She can't come back from this." The teenager recording, barely containing his excitement, muttered under his breath. 10 million views before we land, easy." At the galley, Grace's shoulders eased, her grip on the manifest loosening as a quiet sigh of relief left her lips. She glanced at Maya, a flicker of admiration in her eyes, though she quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention. Claire, however, stood frozen in the aisle, her fingers tightening around the tablet as if it were an anchor. Her voice, when it came, was shaky, no trace of the commanding tone she had wielded minutes earlier. Claire, quietly. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Maya, still seated with calm composure, slowly turned her gaze fully on Claire, her voice as steady as ever. "Maya, evenly. You didn't know because you didn't care to ask. You judged first. And now the whole world gets to see what that looks like." Phone shifted closer, capturing Claire's paling face and Maya's unwavering calm. The cabin felt like a courtroom, every passenger a silent witness to the verdict that was about to come down. Maya rises. The cabin went silent again, every whisper and shuffle fading as the tension tightened like a drawn bowstring. The glow from the windows painted long streaks of light across the aisle, making every movement feel deliberate, heavy. Maya placed her phone down gently on the armrest, her fingers resting over it for a moment before she slowly stood. Her cream blazer caught the light as she rose, her posture tall, steady, commanding, yet her movements were graceful, not rushed. Every eye in first class followed her. Phones shifted upward to frame her, recording her every step as she turned to face Claire, who now stood frozen in the aisle, her confident posture replaced by a rigid unease. Maya's voice, calm but sharp, filled the quiet space. "Maya, evenly. You thought I didn't belong here. You thought raising your voice would make you right. But Claire, all you've done is show everyone what happens when power is abused." The businessman across the aisle muttered just loud enough for the nearby cameras to capture. And here comes the nail in the coffin. Claire's fingers tightened around her tablet, her eyes darting between Maya, the captain, and the sea of recording phones. Her voice, once booming, now came out thin, strained. Claire, stammering. "Miss Johnson. I was just following protocol." Maya didn't raise her voice, but her tone cut like steel. Maya, firmly. "No, Claire. You weren't following protocol. You were following prejudice." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others holding their phones even steadier to capture the moment. Claire's face paled further, her lips parting as though to respond, but no words came. Her authority, once unshakable, now crumbled entirely in the quiet weight of the cabin. The corporate reveal. The tension in the cabin deepened as a soft thud of steps echoed from the jet bridge outside. A few passengers near the front shifted in their seats, craning their necks toward the open doorway. Moments later, two corporate executives appeared at the entrance of the cabin. Both were dressed in tailored black suits, polished shoes, and carried sleek leather folders embossed with the airline's gold logo. Their presence exuded quiet authority, a contrast to Claire's now rattled stance. The executives walked down the aisle slowly, their eyes sweeping over the scene, Maya standing tall, Claire stiff and pale, phones capturing every second. They paused beside the captain, exchanging a brief nod, before one of them addressed the cabin. Executive 1, calmly, projecting. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disturbance. For clarity, Miss Maya Johnson is not only a confirmed first-class passenger, she is also one of the principal shareholders of this airline." A wave of gasps swept through the cabin. Passengers turned to one another, whispers erupting. The teenager recording whispered to his friend. "This is insane. She literally owns part of the company." The socialite, clutching her scarf tightly, whispered nervously. "We were laughing at her, and she could buy every seat on this plane twice over." The second executive, his tone firmer, turned his gaze toward Claire, who now looked rooted to the floor. Executive 2, sternly. "We've been informed of what happened here. This conduct will be addressed immediately." Claire's lips parted, her voice shaky. I didn't know who she was. I was just..." But before she could finish, the first executive's tone sliced through, calm but commanding. "Executive 1. And that is exactly the point, Claire. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of who they are." Phones zoomed in, capturing the executives standing beside Maya, the weight of their presence making it clear. Claire's control was officially gone. The public announcement. The two corporate executives stood side by side in the aisle, their presence radiating authority as the entire first-class cabin waited in tense silence. Phones hovered high, every passenger recording as if the plane itself had become a courtroom. The first executive cleared his throat, his tone even and projecting for all to hear. "Executive 1. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the airline, we deeply apologize for the disruption and the treatment you've just witnessed. Miss Johnson is not only a verified first-class passenger, she is a principal shareholder in this airline. What you've seen today will be dealt with immediately and publicly. Gasps and murmurs swept through the rows again. The teenager recording whispered to his friend, almost giddy. This is already trending. Claire's face is everywhere. The socialite, clutching her scarf, whispered to her companion with a shaky voice. She's literally the reason this plane exists, and Claire treated her like a stowaway. The second executive stepped forward, his voice firm and direct, his eyes on Claire, who now stood pale and rigid, gripping her tablet like a lifeline. Executive 2, sternly. Effective immediately, Claire, you are relieved of your duties. You will collect your belongings and deplane before we depart. Your behavior does not reflect this company's values, not today, not ever. A wave of whispers and shocked reactions filled the cabin, some passengers even exchanging incredulous smiles. The businessman across the aisle murmured to himself, just loud enough for the nearest phones to catch. Businessman, low. There it is, the verdict. Claire's lips trembled, her voice faint as she tried to salvage the moment. Claire, pleading. Please, I didn't mean. But before she could finish, the first executive's calm, cutting voice silenced her. Executive 1, firmly. Save it, Claire. The cameras are still rolling, and the passengers saw everything. You're done. The cabin sat in dead silence, all eyes fixed on Claire as the finality of her downfall set in. Claire's fall begins. The cabin felt like a spotlight had been switched on, every passenger watching as Claire's confident facade finally crumbled. Her hands trembled slightly on the tablet she'd been clutching like a shield. Phones zoomed closer, recording her every twitch and stammer. Claire's voice cracked as she tried one last time to salvage her standing. Claire, pleading. I didn't know who she was. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. I was just enforcing the rules. A low murmur swept through the passengers, not with sympathy, but with judgment. The businessman, his arms crossed, murmured just loud enough for the nearest cameras to capture. Businessman, calmly. Rules aren't the issue. Respect is. And she forgot that. The socialite, once laughing at Maya, now whispered uneasily to her companion. This is bad. She's done. There's no coming back from this. The first executive stepped closer, his expression firm, his voice measured but final. Executive 1. Claire, no one here cares if you knew who Miss Johnson was. What they care about, and what we care about, is how you treated a paying passenger in front of a cabin full of witnesses. This isn't just poor judgment. It's a public relations disaster. Claire's shoulders slumped as she realized the weight of his words. Her lips trembled, but no words came. The tablet in her hands lowered slightly, a quiet sign of defeat. Maya, still standing tall beside the executives, didn't gloat. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and carried through the cabin. Maya, evenly. You judged first, Claire. Not because of rules, but because of assumptions. And now the world gets to decide what that says about you. Phones flashed, passengers whispered, and Claire's eyes darted nervously around the cabin, realizing she was now completely alone. Passengers react. The cabin, once heavy with tension, began to stir with low conversations as the dynamic fully flipped. Passengers weren't whispering cautiously anymore, now their voices carried, some mocking Claire outright, while others turned their admiration toward Maya. A man near the bulkhead, phone raised, muttered into his recording. This is unreal. Claire thought she was in charge, now she's about to be escorted out like a passenger who caused a disturbance. The teenager recording leaned toward his friend, barely able to hide his excitement. This video is already going viral. She's trending before we even take off. The socialite, who had earlier smirked at Maya, now clutched her scarf tightly and whispered. She's standing there, silent, and Claire can't even look at her. It's like the whole cabin switched sides. The businessman chuckled softly, his voice calm but audible enough for nearby phones to capture. Justice moves quietly, until it's deafening. Meanwhile, Grace, the younger flight attendant, stepped forward hesitantly. She looked at Maya, then back at the executives, her voice careful but firm enough for those nearby to hear. Grace, quietly. For the record, she is on the manifest. She's been on it since the booking was confirmed last week. The first executive nodded, his voice calm as he addressed the cabin, and indirectly, Claire. Executive 1. Exactly. This never should have escalated to this point. Every passenger deserves respect. Period. Claire's shoulders slumped lower, her fingers tightening on the tablet as her eyes darted around the cabin, seeing only phones raised, judgmental stares, and zero support. Maya, standing tall, finally glanced at the passengers, her tone calm and measured. Maya, evenly. No one should be humiliated for simply taking the seat they paid for. Not me. Not anyone. Phones captured the line instantly, a sound bite destined to spread far beyond this cabin. Maya addresses the cabin. As the cabin door sealed behind Claire, a wave of relief swept through the first-class section. Passengers shifted in their seats, lowering their phones but keeping their eyes fixed on Maya, who still stood poised near her seat. The two corporate executives stepped aside, giving Maya the floor. The captain remained at the front, his expression steady, while Grace, standing by the galley, watched with a mix of admiration and quiet awe. Maya took a slow breath before speaking, her voice calm but carrying effortlessly through the cabin. Maya, evenly. I never wanted a scene. I didn't board this plane to make anyone uncomfortable. But what you all witnessed just now isn't about me being a shareholder. It's about something much bigger. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the rows, meeting the eyes of passengers who had filmed, whispered, and judged. Maya, continuing. No one, not me, not anyone, should ever be humiliated for simply taking the seat they paid for. Respect isn't conditional. It's not a luxury. It's the minimum standard we all deserve. The businessman, seated across the aisle, gave a faint approving nod, muttering just loud enough for nearby phones to pick up. Now that is how you address a cabin. The teenager recording whispered to his friend. This speech alone will go viral. Watch. Maya's expression remained calm, her tone softening slightly as she turned her gaze to Grace, the younger attendant who had tried to intervene earlier. Maya, gently. And for those who do stand up for what's right, even quietly, know that it doesn't go unnoticed. Grace's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise as she instinctively straightened her posture. Maya looked back to the cabin one final time, her last words steady and resolute. Maya. This airline will do better, because I will make sure it does. And every passenger, no matter who they are, will be treated with the dignity they deserve. A wave of applause broke out through the cabin, soft at first, then rising as passengers clapped and murmured their approval. Some even lowered their phones, caught up in the moment rather than the recording. Applause breaks out. The first-class cabin filled with the sound of clapping, soft at first, then swelling as more passengers joined in. The tension that had lingered in the air for so long finally began to dissolve, replaced by murmurs of relief and quiet admiration. The businessman across the aisle gave a small, approving nod, muttering under his breath as he clapped. Calm, powerful, and to the point, exactly how you handle a moment like that. The teenager recording, still holding his phone steady, whispered to his friend through a grin. That speech alone is going to hit 1 million views before we land. Near the galley, Grace stood straighter, glancing between Maya and the executives. The first executive leaned toward her quietly, his tone measured but warm enough for those nearby to hear. Executive 1, softly. You showed restraint when it mattered, Grace. Expect to hear from us about a promotion soon. Grace's eyes widened, her lips parting as she nodded quickly, a small, genuine smile crossing her face. The passengers near the galley, overhearing, whispered approvingly. She deserves it. She was the only one trying to do the right thing. As the applause began to settle, Maya gave a polite nod to the passengers before sitting back down in her seat. The captain, standing near the front, addressed the cabin briefly, his voice steady. Captain. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We'll be departing shortly. Please remain seated as we prepare for takeoff. Passengers began to relax, phones lowering as the tension eased and the routine of flight boarding resumed. Yet, there was still a quiet hum in the air, the weight of what they had all witnessed still lingering like a shadow of truth. The flight continues. The cabin's atmosphere shifted, no longer heavy with tension, but hushed with a newfound respect. Passengers adjusted their seats, some scrolling through their phones to rewatch the clips they'd just filmed, others murmuring softly about how quickly the power dynamic had flipped. The socialite, who had earlier mocked Maya, now sat quietly, clutching her silk scarf and whispering to her companion. She didn't even have to raise her voice. She had the whole cabin in her hand without saying much at all. Across the aisle, the businessman tucked his phone into his jacket pocket, murmuring to himself. People will be talking about this flight for weeks, and not because of who's in first class, but because of how she handled it. From the galley, Grace emerged with a silver tray, moving with purpose but keeping her tone calm and professional. She stopped beside Maya's seat, lowering her voice so only those nearby could hear. Grace, softly. Miss Johnson, we'd like to offer you a drink on the house. Anything you prefer. Maya glanced up at her, her calm demeanor softening just slightly into a faint, appreciative smile. Maya, gently. Thank you, Grace. Just water will do. Grace nodded, placing the crystal glass carefully on Maya's table before stepping back, her movements respectful, no trace of the tension Claire had brought. Meanwhile, the two executives remained near the front of the cabin, quietly briefing the captain on how the situation would be documented and addressed publicly. Their calm voices reassured the passengers that the flight would now proceed smoothly. The cabin, while quieter, felt different now, not just relieved, but almost reverent, as if everyone understood they'd just witnessed something far bigger than a seating dispute. The viral clip. As the plane cruised smoothly above the clouds, a different kind of buzz spread through the first-class cabin. Passengers who had filmed the confrontation now scrolled rapidly through their phones, posting and sharing the footage before the plane even landed. A teenager 2 rows back grinned as he whispered to his friend, phone in hand. It's already blowing up. Over 200,000 views in the first 10 minutes, and we're not even halfway to our destination. The socialite, still clutching her scarf, glanced at her phone with a pale expression. She muttered quietly to her companion. My face is in that video. We were laughing at her, and now the whole world's going to see it. Across the aisle, the businessman leaned back in his seat, scrolling through headlines as they began to pop up on news feeds. Businessman, quietly. Flight attendant snaps at airline shareholder, escorted off plane. Well, Claire's career just became a headline. At the front, the first executive conferred with the captain, their tones low but firm. Snippets of their conversation drifted back to the first few rows. Official statement, damage control. PR handling before we land. Meanwhile, Maya sat quietly by the window, her phone face down on the table beside her untouched. She gazed out at the horizon, the soft glow of the sunset painting her reflection on the glass. The rising online storm didn't faze her, her composure was still unshaken, her focus elsewhere. A nearby passenger whispered to their partner, voice low but tinged with awe. She didn't even need to post it herself. The whole world's handling it for her. The cabin, though calm, now carried a different kind of energy, one of anticipation, as if everyone knew this flight would be remembered long after it landed. Claire's fallout begins. Back on the ground, even before the flight had landed, Claire's name was everywhere. The videos, posted by multiple passengers, were spreading like wildfire, hashtags trending globally within the hour. In first class, passengers scrolled through their phones, whispering updates as the news exploded. A man near the bulkhead read aloud from his screen, his tone a mix of shock and fascination. Airline response, flight attendant removed after incident with shareholder. They're already making statements. The teenager 2 rows back grinned at his friend. Her face is everywhere. Memes, headlines, news outlets picking it up. She's not just fired, she's a worldwide story now. The socialite, pale and tight-lipped, stared at her phone, whispering quietly. We were laughing along. I hope they don't show our faces in the clips. Meanwhile, across the aisle, the businessman chuckled softly, leaning back in his seat. Actions have consequences. And in the age of cameras, those consequences come fast. At the front of the cabin, the first executive checked his own phone and murmured something to the captain, his tone calm but clipped. HR and PR are already coordinating. She won't be allowed back in uniform, ever. Through it all, Maya remained serene, sipping the glass of water Grace had brought her. Her phone sat untouched beside her, glowing briefly as notifications poured in, but she didn't even glance at it. The passengers exchanged hushed whispers, realizing they weren't just on a flight anymore, they were sitting in the middle of a viral story, one unfolding in real time. The interview request. The plane sailed smoothly through the clouds, but the buzz inside first class hadn't died down. Phones continued to ping with notifications, headlines popping up by the minute as the video spread across every major platform. A woman in her late 20s, dressed in a sleek blazer and holding a tablet, approached Maya's seat cautiously. She had been sitting quietly in the back of first class but now leaned in slightly, her voice polite but professional. Reporter, softly. Miss Johnson. I'm a correspondent with Global News Network. My team just contacted me. They're asking if you'd be willing to make a brief statement before we land. This incident is already global news. Passengers nearby perked up, whispering among themselves as they overheard the exchange. The teenager too rose back, nudged his friend and whispered excitedly. She's getting interviewed on the plane. This is insane. The socialite, still clutching her scarf, muttered under her breath. From being told to move, to having the press chase her, all in the same flight. Maya glanced up at the reporter, her calm expression unchanging. Her voice, soft but firm, carried enough to be overheard by those closest. Maya, evenly. Not now. This isn't about making a spectacle. It's about making a change. There will be a statement, but not here, not yet. The reporter nodded, stepping back without protest. Passengers exchanged looks, their whispers tinged with awe at Maya's restraint. The businessman across the aisle gave a small smirk, murmuring to himself as he adjusted his watch. She knows the moment is hers, and she's not rushing it. The cabin, though still buzzing with quiet excitement, settled into a steady calm, the sense of anticipation lingering like a storm waiting to break. Preparing for descent. The soft chime of the intercom signaled the plane's descent. Passengers adjusted their seats and stowed their belongings, but the energy in the cabin was far from routine. The incident still lingered like a charged hum in the air. Maya sat by the window, her phone still face down on the table. Only now did she pick it up, scrolling through a handful of notifications, messages from her PR team, news outlets, and airline board members. Her fingers moved with calm precision as she typed a few replies, her face serene despite the storm brewing outside the cabin. Across the aisle, the businessman watched her discreetly. He leaned toward the passenger beside him, his voice low. Businessman, quietly. Most people would be giving interviews or making statements already. She's planning something bigger, something controlled. The socialite, still pale, whispered nervously to her friend. She's going to own the narrative. And Claire? She's done. Completely done. At the galley, Grace carefully tidied up trays, her posture straight, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward Maya, as if quietly grateful that someone had noticed her attempts to help earlier. The first executive walked over to Maya's seat, leaning down slightly so their conversation stayed private, though passengers strained to listen. Executive 1, softly. Miss Johnson, we've arranged a press area at the terminal when we land. Would you like to make a statement there? Maya looked up, her voice calm but resolute. Maya, evenly. Yes. But it won't just be about me. It's about what needs to change, starting today. The executive nodded, stepping back to prepare, while the captain's voice came over the intercom. Captain, overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing. The passengers exchanged glances, their whispers growing as they realized this story wasn't ending when the plane touched down. It was only just beginning. The landing and the flashbulbs. The plane touched down with a smooth thud, the runway lights flashing past the windows as passengers craned their necks, some already holding their phones up to record the arrival. The tension wasn't gone, it had merely shifted, turning into anticipation. As the jet taxied toward the gate, a commotion was visible outside the windows. Dozens of cameras and reporters were gathered by the terminal entrance, their flashes flickering through the glass as ground crew tried to keep order. The teenager 2 rows back nudged his friend, whispering with wide eyes. "Look at that crowd. They're not here for Claire, they're here for her." The socialite, her hands gripping her scarf tightly, muttered nervously. "We're stepping off into a press storm. And we were on the wrong side of history 15 minutes ago." The businessman, calm as ever, leaned back in his seat, murmuring just loud enough for nearby phones to catch. "She'll own this landing. Not because she's loud, but because she's deliberate." As the plane came to a stop, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Captain, overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Upon arrival, Miss Johnson will be escorted first as per her request, followed by general deplaning." The first executive approached Maya's seat, offering a brief nod. Executive 1, softly. "The media is waiting, Miss Johnson. We've secured a press area so you can control the message." Maya rose from her seat calmly, smoothing her cream blazer, her movements deliberate and poised. She glanced once around the cabin, her calm voice carrying one final time before the door opened. "Maya, evenly. Let's make this lesson count, not just for today, but for every passenger after this." The door opened, and a wall of flashes and cameras greeted her as she stepped forward. The entire cabin leaned subtly into the aisle, phones recording as Maya walked toward the terminal, flanked by executives, her composure unshaken. The statement. The terminal outside the gate was a sea of flashes and microphones, reporters jostling behind barricades as passengers lingered inside the jet bridge to watch. Phones were still rolling from the cabin windows, capturing every second. Maya stepped up to the podium the airline had quickly set up, the 2 corporate executives standing behind her, their presence formal but secondary. She didn't rush. She took a quiet breath, looked over the sea of cameras, and began speaking in a voice calm, steady, but resonant. "Maya, evenly. What happened on that flight isn't just about me. It's about how people are treated, when no one knows their name, when no one realizes what power they hold, when they're just a face in a seat." The flashes intensified, reporters shouting questions, but Maya raised her hand gently and continued, her voice unwavering. "Maya, continuing. I don't want this to be a story about revenge. I want it to be a story about change. Every passenger, regardless of what they look like, what seat they paid for, or what assumptions others make, deserves basic dignity. And as a shareholder, I will make sure this airline leads that change." Behind her, one of the executives nodded subtly as cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment for the world. Inside the jet bridge, passengers still waiting to deplane whispered among themselves. The teenager filming muttered to his friend. "She's not just clearing her name. She's making this bigger, she's turning it into a movement." The businessman, standing a few rows back near the door, murmured with a small, knowing smile. "That's why she didn't speak earlier. She was waiting for this." Maya concluded, her words landing like a promise to everyone listening. "Maya, firmly. This won't just end as a headline. Policies will change. People will change. And I'll make sure every flight after this one feels different, for everyone." The reporters erupted with questions, flashes strobing across her calm expression, but Maya simply nodded once, stepping back from the podium with the executives at her side. The departure and reflection. As Maya stepped away from the podium, escorted by the 2 executives and the captain, the terminal erupted with more questions, but she didn't pause. Her calm steps carried her through the flashing cameras toward a waiting black sedan parked just beyond the media barricade. Reporters shouted over each other, passengers who had just deplaned lifting their phones to capture her final moments at the airport. The teenager from first class, still filming, whispered to his friend as he watched. Teenager, low. That wasn't just a flight, that was history. People are going to talk about this for years. The socialite, adjusting her scarf nervously, muttered to her companion as they exited behind the crowd. I feel like we were part of something, and not in the way we wanted. The businessman, strolling calmly through the terminal with his briefcase, spoke softly to another passenger. She didn't just win. She taught everyone in that cabin, and probably everyone watching online, what quiet power looks like. Inside the sedan, Maya sat back in her seat as the door closed behind her. The city lights beyond the airport glimmered through the tinted windows, but her gaze was fixed forward, her expression steady, contemplative. Her phone buzzed with alerts, trending hashtags, messages from major networks, and notifications from board members, but she placed it face down on the seat beside her. The driver asked softly, straight to headquarters, Miss Johnson? Maya, calmly. Yes. It's time to turn today's spectacle into tomorrow's change. The car pulled away from the terminal as the cameras behind them flickered out of view, the hum of the city replacing the chaos of the airport. Back inside the terminal, passengers lingered, still whispering about the woman who had been humiliated, revealed, and vindicated, all in one flight. Every one of them knew the story they just witnessed wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a turning point,